Welcome back to Behind the Design with OPEX coaches, Brandon Gallagher, Daniel Persson. We are back with a continuation of last week's discussion on peaking an MMA athlete. Brandon's going to dig into some programming in a little more detail because we kind of stayed a bit more conceptual, although we did look at a program and kind of dissect it a little bit, but we were talking a lot
I was a little
more.
too broad last week. I think we got to dive into some specifics here.
I don't know.
Both you and I
It was
like
a great
principles.
discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great discussion. Well, I'll leave you with the guys, and I will be in the Q&A box. Q&A is open, and yeah, we welcome any of the questions that you might have for these awesome coaches. Appreciate you guys being here, and I'll leave you with that.
Let's go. All right, Daniel, how we doing?
Good. I managed to get through my tough session plan from you on the deadlift session I had. So
some heavy weight.
Yeah, it's going to be a great week. I know it. I managed to get through that session, and yeah, fine. How about you?
Good. Yeah, training hard.
Cool.
Got a good workout in. I was just moving around, feeling how sore I am from this morning and the rest of this week as well. So I don't usually do like full. I haven't done like full barbell squats in a really long time, but we have like this almost like this dive bomb squat. It's like a safety bar that's like a machine. It's got the safety bar handle. Thing kills my legs, and I've been doing that the last few weeks. It's torturing my legs, but we're here. So but yeah, so we're going to be continuing the conversation from last week. Obviously, last week we dove into a little bit more broader terms of like training an MMA athlete. I think I kind of went in a couple different directions, obviously with the athletes I've trained in the past and the experiences I've had with them, plus also the kind of differences conceptually that I would have and how I would kind of handle those situations, right? And I think me and Daniel kind of talked off stream, and we're figuring that like it'd be nice to actually dive into some like actual program design. So what I'm going to do today, I got a couple programs I'm going to go through, but I've designed some general MMA programs for one. There was a gym I work with out in Ireland called FAI, and they have a lot of amateur athletes out there, amateur fighters, and I kind of built a full out of camp and in camp program that they follow for their gym. So this is something that I built based on like the sparring schedule, the training schedule, that sort of thing. So I'm going to kind of dive into why I put certain things in certain places. And then I'm going to also kind of break down how I would change it for certain athletes, or how I would kind of, show you the progression throughout the month and actually like peaking someone for a fight. Right. Just to kind of like briefly recap, last week we talked about, most of the time with a fighter, you're looking at anywhere for like 4 to 6 weeks for like a peak. Has been my experience, is where it works really well, where you're not really like throwing the person into the fire too quick, and you're also not under preparing them for a fight. Obviously, there comes situations, like I've said in the past, you just got to be ready, and I think that's when probably some of the best athletes, that's where they make their difference, or they make their mark, is when they're ready for anything at any time. But obviously with strength conditioning, I think the biggest piece of the puzzle is making sure your program allows you to show not only the pieces of progression, but just making sure you're putting them in the right place to succeed, right? So I just want to wait for this screen to come up. There we go. So this is a program I've worked on in the past that I work like specifically for this gym. Now, this was built, again, a little bit more of like a general overview for the gym, because obviously I wasn't working with anyone particular at that facility, but this was more like, hey, we got guys who are fighting consistently. We want them to kind of have an understanding of what does it look like to peak, what's something they can follow, and how can we keep them healthy and progressing inside the programming. So with this gym, these guys are a little bit younger, a little less like a lower training age. So a lot of the stuff we have here is you're going to see kind of similar to what we've talked about, Daniel, even with some of the things I've implemented in like your programming, and some of the things we talked about, like condensed conjugate, but also breaking down like specific conditioning days, as you'll see here, and go from there. So looking at a layout like this, again, with an MMA schedule, like we kind of talked about last time, there's about 5 different sports you got to kind of account for throughout the week. We got wrestling, jujitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, and then like MMA itself as a sport that you're actually training and taking time to do in like a class setting or a training time. So with FAI in particular, this gym was set out to have, I believe it was Monday, or it is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday sparring days. Now that's a lot, but the sparring days for a gym like this, being that they're a little bit younger and that sort of thing, like you can spar more days. Some gyms spar more than others. It just kind of depends on the output of the gym. And then the other days are optional as well. So it's Mondays. I know Mondays 100% a spar. Wednesdays 100% a spar. I believe Friday is an optional day. That's kind of why I put here like accessory day or optional day. So like I mentioned last time, I like to do high days high, low days low. So in those high spar days, those high CNS driven stress days, I like to get a nice heavy lift in. So what I want to do first is kind of break down what a day would look like in a spar. And also I want to talk a little bit more about the microdosing model and how I would actually use that in a session to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck. Anything you want to add first before I dive into this, Daniel?
No, go ahead.
Cool.
Let's go.
So from the start, just kind of a regular session. If we're just talking like top to bottom of session, we're going to get our warm up in. We're going to get our heel to toe series in. We're going to get our single leg movements. We're going to get our low level plyometrics. And then we're going to start to work into the higher plyometrics and ballistics or higher impact. So we got depth drop progression. We're going to just be working on progressing this as we go. We're working on depth drops from a box. Then we're working on the depth drops from into a jump at the end of that drop. And then we're looking at a depth drop into like a redirect. So like a change of direction type drill here. Now, even with the plyometrics, one thing we want to start to focus on too is progressing those properly. If you're new to plyometrics, you can get a pretty aggressive stimulus just by working on like basic jumping patterns. If you're more advanced and you've had more experience inside of plyometrics, it's good to kind of like cycle out like you would any other type of like strength movement. So working through a phase of like force absorption, and then we're working through a phase of non-counter movement jumps, and then we're working through a phase of counter movement jumps, and we're working through a phase of, change of direction drills as we get a little bit closer, because these things are a little bit more advanced as you get, increase the skill level here. But you can always work on this sort of thing, whether it's a depth drop or a broad jump or like a vertical or something like that. Like this is something we can do year round. So this is something that's very basic and can be translated over to a lot of different people, and they can kind of take this in, and this can be adjusted based on the height, right? So you could do a higher depth drop, you can do a lower depth drop if you're just working on whatever phase of it that you're working on at the moment. So these are really good opportunity to kind of work on that plyometric phase and start to increase, obviously, the force absorption we're getting from that depth drop. But obviously in this, you can see the progression just even within these 3 movements where we're just working on the landing, then we're working on that landing and absorbing that force and then redirecting that force into a full broad jump. And then we're taking that force and redirecting our weight, and we're moving ourselves laterally. So that redirect is essentially you land into the broad jump and then you're pushing yourself laterally from left to right on each of these reps. So as you can see that I wrote 3 reps per side. So on the Coach RX app, obviously we'd have everything laid out here video wise. So I can just kind of show you what the depth drop off the box might look like. So we got this right here.
Depth, drop, and stick. So what I'm going to do here, in theory, I want to find jump great. The idea is step down.
He's catching into that landing position. And that's the idea with a lot of this stuff is you're just taking that force, dropping yourself off the box, and almost like warming up the body for what's to come next, which I'll show you in a second. And again, this is a really important phase to also progress throughout the training camp, because the better we can be with these types of movements, we're going to get a lot of that force creation early on in these sort of patterns, right? Then from there, what we would work on, and one of the things I like to work on is like a banded trap bar, something explosive that we've talked about in the past. This goes a little bit more with, that condensed conjugate type of method where we're working on some sort of speed with accommodating resistance. With the trap bar, I like this position for a lot of people because it takes a little bit more stress off the lower back. Obviously, with straight bar deadlifts, that's kind of the conventional way that people deadlift. But with a trap bar, depending on your length, depending on your experience, the trap bar can be a little bit of an easier position to find yourself in, and it's a little bit easier to kind of attach the band and feel that tension throughout. So here, what we started to do, and this is a very low percentage, so this should allow them to move fast, and then with that band at the top, we're going to be getting that accommodated resistance, which is essentially going to create, let's say, at the bottom, when we're at the ground, let's say, the keep it simple, the bar is 100 pounds. At the top, it's going to feel like 135 pounds with the band tension, right? So what that does is that essentially creates tension, increased tension through the hardest parts of the deadlift, and gives us that speed effect without actually having to move as fast. We're still giving the intent to move as fast as possible, but that band tension kind of increases at the top and then it decreases as we hit the bottom, which allows us to work on those positions a little bit more. So
do you use trap bar deadlift a lot, like in relation to the regular deadlift?
Yeah, because like I said, the thing is, I find with the straight bar deadlift, if they're more experienced and it is something, I guess, visually, right? Like, because for the most part, I find that like kettlebell deadlifts and trap bar deadlifts just automatically put you in a better position, right? And most people, once you have experience coaching people like in the deadlift, most people can lift a little bit more in a trap bar deadlift than they would be able to in like a straight bar deadlift. And that's mostly because the hand position, right? That loaded hand position, it's out to the side. You're going to get a little bit more leg drive. The weight's not out in front of you. It's kind of out to the side of you. So it's a little bit better pulling position for most people. It's going to be a little bit of a stronger position. With the trap bar, it also starts a little bit more of like as like a squatty type position than it would the straight bar deadlift. I also find, again, in regards to bang for your buck and safety reasons, the trap bar is going to put these guys who might be a lower training age in a position where that risk factor goes down, like, a pretty significant amount. Obviously there's still risk involved, but having a trap bar as opposed to a straight bar is going to put you in a position where personally, you're able to lift a little bit more, right? And then you're going to get a little bit more out of that lift and keep yourself a little bit safer. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, because I use it for, usually my question is for myself when I do my design in the exercise selection. I usually ask myself, like, if we have the deadlift and the trap bar deadlift, I'd perceive for most people that learning the trap bar deadlift is lower complexity, and it becomes down to like what kind of stimulus do I want? Is it worth the time educating them or teaching them the technique or to overcome that complex portion or that increased complexity in exercise selection? And it's like, if we take like an explosive hip extension, do I really need to have them do cleans? Can I do kettlebell swings? And if I look at the sport, does it argue that I need to teach them this technique? Maybe not. And it comes down to just like, how do I get them to move in a way that I want, but with exercise selection. So I think it just, as you said, it depends on training age and how competent you are, so that the complexity doesn't come in the way of the intention of the exercise.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, which you touched on, is, how I usually handle that is I do, like, for example, with a squat, right? Like a squat's a better example. Sometimes it's really hard to find variations that kind of mimic a back squat, for example, right? But the risk to reward ratio for teaching someone to back squat and then get the full strength relation or strength adaptation from it, sometimes you kind of have to ask that question, like, is this worth the time, right? For example, Ian was somebody who, he's just a long individual, and before he would even get the strength stimulus of the squat in his legs, his limbs, and there would be some other limiting factors that I think would get in the way of him actually training like full capacity or full strength of his legs, right? So for me, what I would do in that situation is I would use something similar to like a leg press or some sort of lunging pattern, right? And then I would do something like that, but then my accessory work, because I still think it's important to go through like a full range of motion squat. The accessory work would be like a goblet squat or like a front squat or a double kettlebell front squat, something that's going to allow him to move in that full range of motion. But the the stimulus I'm looking for isn't like absolute strength there. It's just almost just like range of motion. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So similar to with the deadlift, I would say I think it's important to learn how to, because the biggest difference here, right? And this is something that goes along with just training in general. There's like skill-based movements where you have to kind of, I would say like rowing as an example. If you're familiar with like concept 2 rower, right? Like that's a very fluid based movement, or a very, I would say like a skill based movement. You kind of have to learn how to create tension at the right times and then relax at the right times, and create tension at the right times and relax at the right times. That can be very difficult for some people, right? Whereas the assault bike is just an output based thing. It's like, how fast can I go? How long can I hold on? There's not really like skill involved. It's just, I'm just moving my hands and feet at the same time and kind of going with it, right? Whereas like the row, you can get really good at the row and not exert that much force if you know how to use your body properly, right? So with a straight bar deadlift, I think that there's obviously a carryover in regards to like absolute strength, and that it's good to know how to move your body around the bar, right? Because just like Olympic lifting, a lot of times we have to move our body around the bar and not the bar around our body, especially when you're using certain amounts of weight. With a straight bar deadlift, oftentimes you have to move your body around the bar to create like an efficient bar path. With the trap bar deadlift, you kind of take all of that out of the equation, and it's just like, how much can you lift, right? Puts you in a stronger position, especially with someone, for example, again, like Ian, who's a little bit longer. He's got longer legs, longer arms. That position for him is going to be a lot more comfortable and safe than it is forcing him into a straight bar deadlift. Because even just like the eye test with someone like that, when I would watch him deadlift versus like watching Amanda deadlift or watching Ariane deadlift or watching a general client deadlift, like that position was so much harder to achieve for him with load, like with enough load that's going to give him adaptation, that it's like, okay, we're not going to risk it here and take a chance. It's like, we know we can get the load from this movement. So we can either make that an accessory movement, or it's just not necessary, and we don't really need to shove it down their throat and make them do it,
Yeah, and also just finally on the trap bar, I think it makes a lot of sense to have the trap bar deadlift when it's banded and supposed to be, when speed is the goal, and being explosive, because it puts more demand on your competence in terms of positioning when you really need to explode through the movement. Whereas if you struggle a bit with positioning and you might, if you do at a slower tempo or a regular tempo you would do if it would be a strength piece, it might be worth it with the straight bar deadlift. But it makes a lot of sense also, just given that it's supposed to be a speed element, that it's to take some complexity out of the movement.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And that's, I would say that's a really good explanation of it too, to kind of like transition from there. But, so in camp, again, I always like to go less volume, higher intensity, right? And one of the things I've always used in regards to training here are these speed circuits. And with these speed circuits, essentially what we're doing here is we're taking these patterns and we're introducing some sort of like French contrast into it, right? And if you're familiar with like a French contrast or some sort of like like pre-loading pattern or like muscular fatigue type deal before you get into an explosive thing, essentially what you're doing here from like a circuit like this that you see, we have the bench press into the pins, we have a wall ball wall throw, which is just basically like a chest pass, and then we have banded repeated pulls. So we're taking that bench press or the bar, and we're basically laying down on a bench. We're pressing this thing into the pins as hard as we can. So we're creating what's called an overcoming isometric. And the difference between an overcoming and a yielding isometric, overcoming means there's an immovable force. Like you're trying to basically move an immovable force, which obviously you're not going to be able to move it. So it's creating tension in the muscle, right? A yielding isometric, just, even similar to driving, is like you're holding a position for an extended period of time. So think in regards to a bench press, for an overcoming isometric, you're pressing into the rack and the rack's not going anywhere, and you're just creating as much force as you possibly can. A yielding isometric would be like you're holding a bench press at 90 degrees and you're just holding the weight out in that position, right? two different things. Obviously, a yielding isometric is going to be a little bit different from an overcoming. I like to do overcoming isometrics because, like I said, you're really kind of creating a lot of force here. And what this does is it kind of primes the nervous system. So then we go into a movement like a wall throw or a chest pass or whatever you want to call it, and we're able to move that a little bit faster, right? The whole idea about French contrast is going from, a very high force output movement into a very explosive movement, because our body is primed and we should be able to get a little bit more out of that movement. You'll oftentimes see this with, trap bar deadlifts and the box jumps, or you'll see this into like a heavy box squat into a broad jump, or a heavy box squat into a vertical jump. And what this allows us to do is kind of essentially, like, I think we've all done this before, where you lift something heavy and then you go and like take something a little bit lighter and you're like, oh wow, this feels a lot lighter, right? That's the stimulus we're trying to get inside of this session, while also kind of creating a little bit of an endurance stimulus as well, right? Sometimes, depending on the athlete, I'll kind of dwindle this down even more, and I'll literally just do the bench press into the pins and the wall ball throw, right? Or the chest pass. The other thing I like to do is like an overcoming isometric on the landmine, which you'll see it with a rotational throw with a med ball. But the banded repeated pull just gives us a little bit of stimulus and keeps the arms moving, and still gives us like that burn inside of this, because we want this we want to keep the intensity very high here. But as you can see, it's very low reps. It's very low time. There's a decent amount of rest in between with a minute. And this is where we start to kind of talk about what we did last time, which is create that minute and make it as efficient as possible. With something like this, from round 1 to round 3, there's going to be a drop off inside of that set, right? But the goal is each and every round, after you get that minute of rest, we're creating force, we're expressing force, and then we're kind of creating a little bit of an endurance stimulus or fatigue stimulus that's going to carry over into that next round. So with these types of things, what I like to do here is I like to build these up each week in the rounds and sets. And like I said, we start with an overcoming isometric here into the pins. We have a 3-second hold. So essentially we're going 1, 2, 3 as hard as we can into that rack. 1, 2, 3 for 5 reps, right? So it's about 15 seconds of total isometric holding in that round right there. Then we're doing just 3 med ball passes as hard as we can, taking a little bit of time in between, maybe like 2 to 3 seconds. Set yourself, jump and explode into that wall as hard as we can. And then we're throwing in some banded repeated pulls at the end, just for 20 seconds to kind of work the upper back a little bit more. You're doing this for 3 rounds, then you're resting for a minute, and then you're hitting another set for 3 rounds. So this is essentially 12 total rounds of the work, but we're doing it split between 3 rounds and 4 sets. Then from here, we would throw in some sort of ab workout at the end. I usually like to do like ab wheel rollouts and hanging knee raises are probably my favorite core exercises that I like to do. I just find them to be probably the most useful for MMA, and I also find them the easiest to teach for MMA. And I do find a lot of ab workouts tend to be a little bit, I guess, extra, we'll call it, for lighter terms. They just kind of they tend to be a little bit extravagant, and realistically, if you want to get bare bones, like what you need, my opinion is like it's an ab wheel rollout, and then it's hanging knee raises, and maybe a couple more outside of that.
Why would you say that they are so useful for MMA?
What was the question? Sorry.
So why would you what's the thoughts behind that, they being so useful in especially for MMA, like ab wheel rollout and hanging?
Well, the biggest thing for the ab wheel rollout, I think, just from a functional perspective, that's probably the best, if not one of the best core exercises, because we're truly like resisting flexion extension of the spine as you're working through. If you're doing it the right way, right? You're keeping a flex spine. You're reaching your hands out over your head as you're extending all the way through, and you're really forcing your body to maintain that neutral spine. And you're going to find a lot in MMA, and especially jiu-jitsu, like especially grappling, core tension in weird positions is like such a important skill, right? Like being able to create force and maintain force and move through certain positions. Like sometimes you get stuck in positions where you have to literally use your core to a certain level that you can't really move outside of it. Your legs are pinned, your arms are pinned, something like that. With the and why I think those two work so well together, and that's really all you essentially need, is because one is anti-flexion extension, and then the other one is flexion extension, right? Yeah. So with the hanging knee raise, we're working on creating that hollow hold ourselves while moving our entire body and flexing, extending the spine. And that one I've always felt just creates a stimulus where we're actually having to create tension with the upper body, right? We're holding ourselves into this. And that's, you can either like hang with your hands there, or I personally prefer having your elbows and like sleeves, if you have those elbow sleeves. That way you can really focus on crunching. I think sometimes when your hands get extended overhead, you end up having like thoracic extension. You're not able to fully keep yourself flexed. But when you're driving those elbows down and they're out in front of you, you're able to almost like do a sit up in that position while also allowing the knees or legs, if you do straight leg or knee raises, to flex, and you're really isolating the hip here, right? And I think another big aspect of this is being able to move the rest of your body while also creating core tension. And I think that's like such an underrated skill in general, but then especially in MMA, because I'm going to talk about this a little bit more on a conditioning piece I like to do. But when I think about some of these things and I try to throw them into training, I try not to just think like, hey, I want to get a strong core, right? I also think about there's positions in MMA that are very challenging, and if you don't know or you don't train, it's going to be really hard for you to actually like implement them inside the training. I think core structure in regards to, like I kind of just explained before, is really important. And then I also think breathing under tension. I think that's like such an underrated aspect of MMA that no one thinks about, right? Because everybody talks about conditioning, everyone talks about strength, but you don't talk about when someone's 200 pounds and they're laying on your chest and you still have to breathe. And then you're getting out of that position and not having the ability or the experience to say, wow, I just had 200 pounds of pressure on my chest, and now I'm getting out and I have to breathe again. And that's where most people mess up. And I would say, like, in MMA, the biggest, I'd say, limiting factor is not usually conditioning for most people. It's usually that like adrenaline dump, and then it's going from that very high tense pressure environment where someone's hugging you, squeezing you, holding you, and then releasing that and still being able to kind of go and deal with that, I guess, that difference in pressure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like if you have max tension and brace like a 1 rep max, you're not going to be able to move, and that's a good thing. And then if you have, it's almost like if you have zero tension, you're going to be able to move really well. Mm-hmm. And then you have the max tension, and you need to develop the coordination to be really good at matching how much tension do I need in this given. If I take coming from a CrossFit background and seeing people, let's say we have 30 reps of semi-heavy deadlift, you're not going to be able to tense up like it was a 1 rep max because you're going to be gassed out, you can't breathe. So you need to match the amount of tension you need where you still can breathe and get through those 20 deadlifts. And finding that balance between, I need to be able to move, but I need the appropriate amount of core tension to solve the problem in a good way. And I think that can be practiced like in the gym and during the strength pieces, where you apply, like when you do core work, you also put a demand on coordination in relation to, you also need to move while defending this tension.
Yeah. And that's the biggest thing for me that I've seen is I've seen so many people who are great on the bike. They're great on their runs. They're great in all these, single aerobic pieces of training, but then you throw them into jujitsu, or you throw them into wrestling, or you throw them in the Muay Thai, like some sort of like pressure-based sport where there's almost outside tension on the body, and their cardio goes to shit. And it's specifically because they're not used to keeping that tension, like you said, and knowing when and how to move around it, right? And I think another big thing too, and this is just basic core stuff, but it's like, how many people can actually brace their core while moving outside of it, right? I think a lot of people struggle to brace their core unless they're like fully focused on bracing their core. And I think that's a huge problem, because we want to be able to brace our core while also being able to move our other limbs, because that's what allows us, function, right? And that's what allows us to kind of explore, how do I want to put this? Like, especially in MMA, allows us to create moves. It allows us to essentially find alternative ways to do what we need to do. And I think one of the biggest things is if you have to sit here and think about, okay, I have to have everything stiff. My legs need to be in a certain positions. My hand needs to be in a certain position to keep my core tight. then that's a problem, right? Because that's not going to translate into athletics well. We need to create positions where, again, not translating the sport into it, but creating those avenues of like, all right, if I want to produce or perform in this sport well, what pieces of my performance do I need to kind of work on inside the gym, right? And we talked about this a lot last time, which is not bringing the sport into the gym, or not bringing the field into the gym, but creating less opportunity to second guess your body when you go out there.
Yeah, and it's like when you hear athletes when they get tackled or hit, or like I coach a lot of weightlifters, you can almost hear them when that force peaks, like in the turnover in the clean, for example, you can hear them go, and they are really good like matching that small window where they need real max tension on the core and then release it to be able to move again. And if you think about it, when people get tackled, they need like max tension to defend that tackle, or if they get punched, or when they're in the middle of the turnover in a clean, where like when the force peaks, you need to just boom, and then you need to be able to move again.
Yeah, I mean, just to think about it, if you had to move the entire, like with the clean specifically, right? And I know a ton of people, probably a lot of people that listen to this have experience with the clean, but the general public probably doesn't have a ton of experience with the clean. When you hit it properly, it's smooth because you're moving yourself around the bar, right? You're finding, like Daniel just explained, those points of tension to explode through and create almost that time that you can allow yourself to drop underneath the bar. If you were moving that bar just by yourself, first off, you wouldn't be able to do it, and second, it would be so exhausting that you might get one rep and then be like, all right, I don't even know if I could do another one today, right? And it's the same thing inside of jiu-jitsu. It's the same thing inside of MMA. You have to learn how to fluidly move without wasting so much energy, because you have to do this consistently for 25 minutes, right? At the highest level. And then you have to do this while someone's trying to punch you and then hurt you and kick you and do all this other stuff. So you have to be physically prepared and mentally prepared, but you also have to find those ways to, like I said, the rower, right? Like find those ways to move and only use the tension when you absolutely need to, but know when you need to use the tension, like you can activate it or use it when you absolutely need it. So from here, with this program specifically, I did implement some sort of anaerobic sprint here. So what we did here was a 10-second bike sprint, rest 15 seconds, 10 seconds on the skier. Now, with something like this, we obviously, when we're talking about actual anaerobic training or we could call it like high intensity sort of conditioning training, we want to have, and if you're familiar with obviously like the OPEX method and the way they kind of talk about conditioning from the beginning point of view, you want to kind of have that idea where the pace is really high and we're getting a lot of rest on the back end of this, right? So I think in the like general OPEX conditioning, it's recommended it's like 10 seconds and then it's like 2 minutes and 30 seconds of rest. So something similar to that. In this situation with a lot of these guys, they're already dealing with a lot of like anaerobic stress. So I try to keep this a little bit lower and just give them something to kind of work on throughout the week. So we have these bike sprints are going to be at a pretty high pace. Obviously, this isn't we don't want them dead after this, right? Like we want them to be able to complete the 10 seconds on the ski erg, rest for the 2 minutes and do this again. And we should be able to kind of, mimic this across all 8 rounds. And what we would do here on this sort of day on like something like this is I would keep this here and then I would do some sort of like 10-minute thing after this, just to kind of like slowly bring the central nervous system back down. And this would be more on like an off sort of day, right? Now, normally with some of the athletes, as I've adjusted them and I've adjusted things, I probably would take this out and do some sort of like a like lower intensity aerobic day. But a lot of these guys do enjoy having that very hard push on conditioning. And like we kind of talked about last week, mentally training, preparing a program is just as important as like physically preparing one. So giving them that sort of environment where they're like, hey, I can feel this, and I feel the difficulty. I feel like the feedback from this, and putting them in parameters that they're going to benefit from, but not sending it, too far where they're going to tire themselves out or burn themselves out. And why I like this is because the 10-second bike sprint isn't so long that it's going to, kill them. And it also gives them a little rest in between. And then we also work on something that is a little bit different of a sprint. Obviously with the ski erg, you're not going to be able to sprint as you would on a bike, but it still gives them a little bit of that push for that extra 10 seconds here, which then kind of creates that elongates that anaerobic process, right? So instead of 20 seconds on the bike, where after 10 seconds, you're going to have like most of the time a huge dip in performance on the bike, we're resting a little bit, creating just a little bit more of like elongation of that feeling, but it's going to be with an upper body movement, and it's going to allow them to then come out of it, rest for 2 minutes, and do this consistently. So over the course of the couple weeks, I would progress this probably by time first. So I'd go 10 seconds for 2 weeks just to kind of give them a week to do it, and then a week to match it and feel it. And then from there, I would increase the time. I'd probably go 12 and 12, do the same thing, a week to do it, a week to match it, just to kind of build that intensity. And then from there, depending on how they're feeling, I would either go a 15-second sprint or a push, I would say. And then from there, I'd probably, as we got to 15 seconds, I'd probably bring the rounds down. Or if you weren't going to go up with the rounds, I would go keep the time the same and just kind of increase the rounds through each week. Any questions there? Thoughts?
No.
Cool.
Super clear.
So on Wednesday, right? So as you guys can see, on these aerobic days and anaerobic days, these would mostly be on like technical days. So this would be like, might just be jujitsu that day or wrestling. This might just be, technical work on the pads or something where it's not a full spar. And then on these full spar days, like we talked about, we're going to get another lift in. On this one, we're doing more ballistic work. So we're still going to work on the warm up and the low level plyometrics. Then we're going to work on ballistics. So we're going to be working on specific throws. We got kneeling med ball rotational tosses, med ball punch throws, and then med ball side slams. So we're just basically working on some rotation here, some side bending, moving through some weird positions, some different positions that you're not normally going to see in your training, and also allowing the individual to kind of move with some intent in the upper body, because it is hard. I do find it hard to fully maximize like power and speed of the upper body. There's really only a couple ways, and me and Daniel kind of talked about this as well in your own programming. But when you look to kind of create full force, throws are the best way, right? And if you can find ways to create full force throws, which if you're indoors, it's really hard. If you're outdoors, it can be a little bit easier because you can do overhead tosses. You can do, almost like these push press type tosses with the ball. But med ball throws and finding ways where you can fully express force through rotation and punch throws and med ball or chest throws, those usually tend to be like the best for the upper body, right?
I will.
So then from here,
I will say
ahead.
though, it's still a struggle with the upper body, like with the throws, because just let's say you want to do 3 reps and you threw the object you're going to throw away. The setup is going to be a bit awkward, or like the reset up when you go for the next rep is going to be a bit awkward. So it's a lot more. It's a bigger problem to solve to be able to perform it for the upper body. Because if you do a throw, making sure to, if you want to do more than 1 rep, solve the problem for kind of the reset up or getting into the next rep is also a bit tricky. Yeah,
and that's the thing. I think with some of this stuff, you got to do what you can do, and you can't, because it is hard, and it's not like a jump where you just land and you can do it again, or a sprint where you can just kind of just sprint, come back, rest, sprint, come back, rest. Like you have to reset every single time, go pick up the ball, come back to where you were, reset your body, do it again. It can be a pain, but these are probably the best ways I've found to do it. I know that movement you found, I forgot what it was, the kettlebell one.
Yeah.
That's not a bad idea either. Just kind of, I guess it can be a little bit dangerous depending on the situation and the individual. Just launching kettlebells in your gym.
For the ones listening, I did send like it was kettlebell attached in the rig with the straps, and you kind of threw the kettlebell, but the dangerous part is it's coming back at you. So
so you got to be ready to catch it.
Really careful.
I guess that'd be a good head movement for the person. That's hilarious.
Instant feedback if you mess up.
Yeah, exactly. Then from here, we got a lower body speed circuit. So there's two things. How I structure the week, there's a couple things I like to pay attention to. Number one is obviously the sparring days, right? I've also found with the lower body training, depending on the individual, structuring that later in the week helps in regards to recovery. And reason being is like if you start the week on Monday with like a heavy leg day, right? And you're an individual who pushes the weight, that could affect you the rest of the week, right? And most of the times in MMA gyms, the first like 3 days of the week are going to be like the heaviest training days. So like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right? Then from there, and Daniel, this is kind of similar to why I kind of structure yours the way I do as well. And this is just the experience I've seen is like, obviously Monday is a hard week for most people. They got to get back to work generally, but in the fight world, that's usually like a sparring day for most people. So they're coming back to the gym, they're getting that first sparring. If you just load up and you hit legs again, then the rest of that week could be kind of like messed up for you, right? Now, why I put legs a little bit later in the week on Wednesday, because that's when the week tends to slow down for most people. Even if you're sparring on like a Thursday, I would switch it to Thursday, but it gives you more time to rest. The weekends are usually, in regards to like MMA training, a little bit more relaxed, and usually they have rest days. So this gives the individual an opportunity to train the legs, have a couple extra rest days into that weekend, and then be ready for it on the back end, as opposed to front loading the week with legs and then having to kind of just like scrape by till the end of the week, right? So with that happening with this lower body speed day, this isn't really something that's going to tax the legs too much, but it is obviously like a lower body focused day. We'd have a similar situation here. We have a lower body speed circuit. We're going to be working on deadlifts into the pins, and this can be with a straight bar or a trap bar. I definitely prefer the trap bar here. Reason why I prefer the trap bar is obviously the hands are out to the side. With the bar out in front of you, it can be a little bit difficult to create that that isometric hold. And sometimes I just don't like the positions that people find themselves in, because you end up getting like a cat back situation where you're getting a lot of flexion in the spine. And as you're pulling through an object that's obviously not going to move, it's a little bit different than when you're pressing through it, right? Then from here, we get into a ISO squat hold. So we're with this one, the reason why I switch, or I kind of use both here, is because with this first movement, we're getting a little bit obviously of that overcoming isometric with that 3-second hold. Then we're overloading the squat pattern with a weight. We're actually holding for this this squat pattern, and then we're getting into a banded squat jump. And now with that banded squat jump, this is what's going to be called an overspeed jump. So with banded jumps as well, so there's kind of like 3 different layers to that. So there's obviously like regular jumps, then there's overspeed jumps, and then there's obviously like weighted jumps that you would do. With the weighted jump, that's going to create a stimulus of you're expressing force with weight on your body, so it's going to feel a little bit harder, but then it's going to kind of create that same stimulus as like an overcoming isometric, where you're loading the muscle and then almost creating, it's going to feel easier when you do your normal body weight. With an overspeed jump, you're essentially taking weight away from your body and moving at a faster speed with the jump. So we're going to attach a band to the rig. We're going to hold it, basically bring it down to our chest after we do the first 2 movements, and we're going to jump as high as we can. And when you see people do this for the first time, they get up there, they're like, whoa, they're flying up in the air with the band. But what this is going to do is going to basically allow us to overload that nervous system, overload the muscle, and then allow us with the band to kind of take that weight away, and then allow us to get up as high as we can and create as much force as possible through this. And this is going to be the same sort of setup, 4 rounds here. Oh, this should be 3 rounds. I think that's a mistake, but 3 rounds here for 3 sets. We're going to work through this, rest a minute, go back, do another set, rest a minute, go back, and that's going to be it for the day. Then at the bottom here, we're going to be working on our hanging knee raises, just like we kind of talked about through that. And then that'll be the session for Wednesday. Now, again, this would be after a spar, right? So this is going to be low volume, especially like in a camp. Get them in, get them what they need to work on, and get them out and let them recover, right? On this day, or this week, or actually this program, I gave them a rest day on Thursdays. So that was just a little bit of a lighter day for most people anyways. And at the gym, that was kind of like a built-in optional rest day for most people, because I think, like I said, there was an optional spar on Fridays as well. These 2 days were like, if you're on the fight team, that's what you're doing for the day. On Friday, it was like, hey, if you want to have an extra spar day, we're going to be here, do some stuff. You're more than welcome to come. Now, on that day, same idea, like I've talked about with a lot of other things, having some sort of bodybuilding focused day where we're working on opportunities to just improve, right? Without taking too much away. This is more of like a low stress bodybuilding day. There's no ballistics, there's no like high level plyometrics here, just like basic stuff. We're working on like a broad jump with the double broad jump and triple broad jump. But with these, I definitely stress to them not to go 110% with those. This is more just kind of like we've talked about, Daniel, as well. Working on full hip extension and training through just that range of motion to kind of improve it. Then we just got, a little bit higher sets here, trying to keep the weight moderate, definitely not trying to go like too difficult on anything, and just progressing from there. And then on Saturday would be another aerobic day. Usually on Saturdays, you're going to see like a day off here, or like I said, another light training day. And on this one, what I like to do is just start to introduce, moving for 5 minutes. And I think this is another thing that is people kind of misunderstand in regards to conditioning, right? And I think when we get into conditioning, especially for MMA, it's truly a sport where like you cannot stop moving for the round. Like if you at any point stop moving, like you're a sitting duck. And it's one of the most exhausting things about the sport. And I think one of the most underlooked things about the sport is that you literally cannot stop moving. So one of the things I like to do with the athletes is just literally get them used to moving for 5 minutes at nonstop, trying to improve the pace on the bike, making sure, and then starting to work into those rounds as well, right? So what I want to see here is essentially they're choosing whether it's calories or distance. It also depends on the bike. I want them to find a pace, and they're going to they're literally just going to move for the 5 minutes and try to build on that and sustain that for each and every round. And then we're going to essentially be building on that throughout the weeks. And this is what this is going to do. Like I said, if you actually look at some of the conditioning that people do, and you look at the actual total time that they're moving, most of the time they're not moving for, so let's say they do a 30-minute workout, they're not actually moving for 30 minutes. They're moving for maybe 10 minutes of the 30 minutes. What this is actually doing here is putting them through or giving them the opportunity to feel what it's like to literally move your arms and legs if you have the assault bike 4 or 5 minutes in a row, and then resting for that 2 minutes here. And how I usually progress this is I usually give them the opportunity to rest a little bit more in the first couple weeks. And then, because like I said, the biggest thing I want them to do is be able to maintain pace. And then as we start to increase the pace, I lower the rest a little bit. So that gives them that same feeling of like, all right, I just moved at a high pace for 5 minutes. Now I only have a minute to rest. And that gets them in that mindset of like, I got to make this 1 minute rest as efficient as possible. Right. And this is normally what I would do with something like this. I might change it up just a little bit depending on the equipment or the individual. But it's this same sort of concept of just moving. And I think with a lot of the things I want you guys to understand with most of this stuff, when I do program out some of these conditioning pieces, the biggest thing here, maybe that's why, because it was down here, that's why it was the wrong thing. But the biggest thing with this stuff is that concept of like, I want them to move. I want them to get used to moving for 5 minutes. And that can be however makes sense in regards to the equipment or the person. But as simple as it can be, it's hopping on a bike for 5 minutes and we're going to move for 5 minutes. If they're a skilled individual and they have experience, like something in CrossFit might look like, mixed modal training. Like with Ian, for example, he was someone who his absolute strength wasn't like up here, but he could do a lot over the course of 5 minutes and continuously move. So I could do things with him where it's like, we could do some sled pushes. We could do the bike. We could do a plank. We could do jump rope. We could do what else? We could do step up, like something that's just keeping him moving for the entire 5 minute round and kind of changing things up. And that's definitely a different way that you can go about it. The simplest way and easiest way to track is like you're on a bike for 5 minutes, you hit this many calories, then you can progress it because you know what you hit. Everything else is kind of like you start adding in different metrics, so it can get a little bit confusing. But I think that obviously covers that. Is there any questions or additions?
Yeah, because it's obviously when you're on a bike or when you do monostructural work, they are for the most part going to be moving throughout the full 5 minutes. But as soon as you do a mixed modal piece where you want them to move, I think it's so easy to, as you said, not take into account logistics or just the fact that the way you design it, they are not going to be moving the whole time.
Yeah.
Or it might be that you throw in a exercise that's going to be really tricky for them when it comes to expressing it, or technique wise, or anything that may create a barrier for them to be moving throughout the 5 minutes. And what I've seen a lot when I have these kind of conditioning pieces is that people want that high skilled movements in there, because it's going to be way more comfortable if there's a high skilled movement, which essentially is going to make me having to rest within the 5 minutes to be able to do it. And then if you just clock the downtime, let's say you have bar muscle staring at the rig before they jump up, you have a lot of time within these 5 minutes where they're not moving. And that's something that what I feel when you design programs, and for maybe intermediate or high level athletes, you maybe give them a 5 minute piece with really low skilled movements, just because you want nowhere to hide. You want them to move all the time, and you get some pushback with the thing that this is not high skill enough. But what it really comes down to is them realizing that there's nowhere to hide. I'm going to be doing movement throughout 5 minutes. There's no reason to stop. There's no skill to blame that I needed to slow down. So I think just take into account and visualize the logistics within this workout, so it doesn't become on the expense of them moving throughout the whole 5 minutes, if that is the purpose.
Yeah. And I think one of the things is, especially, we train every day, right? So it's like, what it's like to truly move for 5 minutes nonstop, right? And when it's like, I did 5 minutes, but I was probably moving for like 3. And I don't think some people understand what truly is like moving consistently, especially like, I know you have a lot of experience running. I have a decent amount of experience running now. When you're just moving for an hour and a half, right? When you're doing a half marathon sort of environment where you're just moving for an hour, 60 minutes to 90 minutes at a pace, mind you, not just moving, right? That is so exhausting. And you don't realize it until you're like, wait, I can't stop moving. Like, I have to move at the same pace. And then one of my favorite things on the bike, and what I see a lot with individuals, and why I like the bike so much, like my favorite piece of equipment is probably the assault bike for training purposes for MMA. One, because there's so many different metrics on it, right? We can track watts, we can track speed, we can track time, we can track calories, we can track distance, we can track what else is on there? I think there's one more, isn't there? I don't know. But anyways, that's like 5 already right off the board that you can track. And that gives you so many different metrics to kind of look at an individual, where it's just like, okay, cool. Like, this is what we need to hold, right? We need to hold 60 RPMs for the next 5 minutes, right? What you'll see a lot of the time is people are like, oh yeah, I can move on the bike for 5 minutes, but it's like 45 to 60 and then back to 48 and then back to 57. And then they're at 60 and then they're going back down to 42. It's not consistent, right? If you consistently hold a pace across 5 minutes, that is so difficult, mentally draining and exhausting. And you're like, what did I just do? Right. And all you were doing was riding the bike for 5 minutes. You don't really realize it because that's not what normal conditioning looks like in a lot of settings. But something as simple as that can give you so much out of like such a basic concept. And that's what translates over to performance. Right. And I think in MMA, right, an MMA setting, this is why like striking is so much more exhausting than jujitsu, right? Because in jujitsu, there's places to hide. Like you said, you can get into a situation, you can hold yourself on the ground. Someone can get your back and they're not going to submit you, or they don't have any, like, for example, they don't have any hooks in, or they don't have like a good hold on you. So you can take a couple seconds and you can hold, or you can hide there and you can kind of get your breath back and wait for the time. When you're standing and you're in front of somebody and someone's throwing hands at you, like, you can't stop. There is nowhere to hide. And that's where MMA becomes very difficult. And even boxing, for example, right? Like, boxing is another sport. It's just striking. There's nowhere to hide, like you're moving for the entire round. You have to find those areas where you can get in and out. You can still keep the volume up. You can move on your feet. You can keep the footwork, the game plan, all that stuff. And that's a very difficult thing to do if you're not used to moving consistently over the course of time, right? And with these sorts of conditioning pieces, they're very simple, they're very basic, they're very repeatable, they're very trackable, right? The metrics are there. Even if it was, 3 different athletes on this bike, you would know what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what they're getting out of it, because you could see the stimulus right in front of you. If me and Daniel both did the bike and we did it for 5 minutes and I was going for 42 RPMs and he's going for 60, it's a different conditioning level, right? It's a different stimulus, and you know what the other person was doing just by looking at those numbers, as opposed to like, all right, now we're going to do a bike, a sled push, a step up, and a double unders, right? Where it's like, I might be better at a sled push, but Daniel might be better at double unders, and now you don't really know where because there's so many skill variables involved with it that you can't actually tell, is this person truly getting fitter, or is it they're just bad at double unders, and that's why they're only completing 2 rounds in 5 minutes? Does that make sense?
Yep. And also, as soon as you go mixed modal, one thing to keep in mind is that a pull-up for a given individual costs X amount, and you can't do anything about it. If you slow it down, it's not going to be, if you compare it to a bike, you can go really slow and the wattage is going down, but a pull-up has a fixed cost.
Yep.
And because no one, or not no one, but yeah, probably no one is never going to be able to, doesn't matter how you approach it, you're not going to be able to do pull-ups for 5 minutes. So, but you can do with the bike or running or any monostructural like cyclical work. You can adjust the intensity in a way that you can actually move for 5 minutes. But as soon as you go gymnastics or weighted movement, you're going to have the problem of it being a fixed intensity on that given rep.
Yeah, and I think Sam Smith obviously is a OPEX or Proof 3. I don't. Yeah, I think, but he just put a post out about this the other day about how, a lot of people assume high level athletes are just better at kind of like suffering, but a lot of them just it costs them less to do reps, right? When they do a squat, it costs them less energy than it costs the average person to do a squat or an overhead press or something like that. So they can do more. Obviously, I do think that there are people who are just better at suffering, but I also think, that is a concept too, where it's like, it doesn't cost you as much to complete a rep, right? And that's where absolute strength comes in. That's where having these concepts of training where it's like, hey, we're moving consistently for 5 minutes. We need to get used to that feeling. So when we actually have to move for 5 minutes at a high level, our baseline is here as opposed to here, right? Yeah. And that's something I really try to teach and get into the athletes that I work with, get into their head, is that with these types of workouts, right? Like this might not be that difficult of a workout overall, but we got to have a baseline of movement for 5 minutes, right? You can't just go into a ring and assume I'm just going to move for 5 minutes and everything's going to work great. Like, can you even, if we're, kind of just to bring it back to general health, if you want to improve your conditioning, right? Can you even walk for 60 minutes nonstop, right? Can you move and do anything for 60 minutes nonstop without being like physically exhausted? So it's like the same thing with 5 rounds. If you want to fight for 5 rounds, can you even sit on a bike for 5 minutes and hold a pace? Because that's a really good start to figure out, like, are you built for this, or do we need to kind of like improve this and see how much we have to improve, right? The last little thing I want to touch on is the structure of this, like in a day. So let's say you actually are, or sorry, I kind of like changed things quick, but I just saw the time. So I want to just one little thing. If you are, for example, sparring, right? One of the ways that I would tweak this for like that kind of concept of like micro dosing this throughout the day. If you have a spar on Monday, then what I would do is I would do this warm up first, right? Before you even spar, I would do the warm up and then I would work on these plyometrics. And then what I would do is I would go spar, right? Then after the spar, have a little snack, rest for like 15, 20 minutes, whatever. Then we're going to come right back in. You're warm, you're ready to go. This is, these types of movements here are something that we can do relatively easy after a spar. I wouldn't rest too long. Like I wouldn't rest more than a half hour, because then you're probably going to need to move a little bit again just to get back into it. But if you can take that spar, rest like 10, 15 minutes, get some water, change your clothes, do whatever, go right into the gym, start to warm up with this trap bar, do a couple sets of the warm up, start to move through. That can be done within like a 2-hour window, 2 to 2.5 hour window. And this is what allows you to kind of maximize the rest for the rest of the day. So this is what I used to do with Ian. We would warm up first. We would have the warm up We would do it pre-sparring because I would travel everywhere with him. We would then do some plyometric work or ballistic work before the spar. He would then go and spar. We'd have about 15, 20 minutes before we'd go to the gym because the gym was relatively close by. We'd head to the gym. We'd do these 3 movement sets right here. And then we'd be out of the gym for the rest of the day, 24 hours, something like that. So he would fully recover, right? The good thing about this type of session here is, like I said, normally I probably wouldn't keep an anaerobic sprint day like this in there unless they liked it physically, like they enjoyed the workout. But for someone like Ian, for example, I would have a full spar with this lift. The next day would probably be some sort of jujitsu or technical work. And then we would have some sort of like aerobic day where this workout here, this 5-minute AMRAP, something similar to this, would be here. Then he would spar on Thursdays. This gym obviously did Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But for this sort of thing, we still have a high day on Monday, and then we have a low day on Tuesday, and we'd have a high day on Wednesday, and then a really low day on Thursday, then a moderate day on Friday, lower on Saturday, Sunday, which would then help us kind of like get ready to go again for those high days at the beginning of the week. And that's a really nice schedule that I found works for a lot of people. But with the microdosing, you can kind of split this session up into multiple sessions throughout the day, where we can take the warm up and the plyometric up first, that training session for the day, and then we can start to get that lift in right after. And you can do the same thing on the other days as well, because I really enjoyed doing like a full warm up before like jujitsu or wrestling or anything like that. So we can implement the warm up before, hit that technical piece, go right into that conditioning after, that aerobic piece after, and then you're getting all that extra rest. So that would be the way I would do it. You could also do it a little bit differently as well. If you did want a little bit more rest, like Daniel kind of talked about last week, we could do warm up. We could do the spar. You could then take a couple hours and then we could rest and just get a little bit of a warm up again after that, just to get ready for that strength piece at the end. But that's obviously another idea for that. But it's just essentially breaking up this session across the week so that the individual can complete everything and give himself enough time to kind of recover from it as well.
That was awesome.
I hope it helps. I know it was a little bit, it was good. It was good. I'll say
Yeah, it was good to connect the principles you guys discussed last week and see it in the design and how it comes to life.
I think the hard thing I struggle with is obviously like, it depends on the individual in front of us. And I know me and Daniel have talked about this a lot. So there's a lot of like general concepts I'm going over, but talking to a specific athlete would change a couple things depending on that. So I get a little bit, I don't want people to take this as like, this is the 100% the way to do it. It's like, here's some ways that I've had that have worked. Here's some concepts. Here's how I would change a couple of things like I just spoke about. But this is a great place to start for an athlete. And if you're someone who's, an MMA athlete or looking to peak properly, having this sort of training in where it's lower volume, higher intensity is going to get you there and keep you safe.
Yeah, that's actually something we could talk about in another episode if you guys wanted to go down that path and just talk about, as individual design coaches, the way in which you really approach the process versus templates. Obviously, this is something we talk about a lot. And some individual design coaches obviously have programs, and they may be designed based on a lot of your experience in working with the population that template was built for. So that could be better than just like a generic template that you're grabbing anyone random. But to talk about the differences could be really impactful also.
Yeah. 100%.
I think also
like
with
I said,
that,
good.
Since it's as you said, it's hard to, when you start speaking about specific case and you work with individual design, it's so easy to go back to principles since they apply to everyone, but that specific case only applies to that individual. So that's kind of why you and I usually end up in the bigger discussion about principles, because that applies to everyone. And the principles are so useful, and to master them, because then you can coach anyone. If you get really good at one case, you are going to be really good at coach people that fits into that specific case. But if you put the effort in to look beyond that and actually dig into principles, you are going to be able to adjust like programs and design to fit whatever individual you have in front of you. So
Yeah, it's
I
always
love
harder
that.
That's
to
just
do
me
general
excusing
programs,
us
you know?
always ending up in a super general discussion.
Well, it's hard because it's like even with this program, right? This was for a gym where it was like 15 kids, right? So it's like, all right, I got to cover 15 different kids to make sure that they're because essentially at that point, it's like, you know, um, you're not working with each kid individually and you're trying to give them the best bang for their buck so that they can get what they need, make sure they're still training and that sort of thing. Whereas if I was to dive into someone specifically in that gym, I'm sure I'd change a lot of things. I'd adjust some of the days, probably wouldn't have some of these things in here. It would just depend. So it's like you want to cover the bases, but that's why I don't really love general programs. I prefer to individually work with somebody, but you got to make your impact where you can.
Yeah, if it gets people moving,
Yeah, exactly.
it's a good thing.
Another question I want to toss your guys' way that could be a potential another episode is connected to an episode that I'm going to do on the Marketing for Fitness Coaches show around specialization, or from a messaging standpoint, getting really clear on who you serve. But I'm also going to do a collaborative chat with Carl for frameworks on the importance of specialization from a coaching career path perspective. But I'm sure that each of you have very unique thoughts on the importance of specialization as a coach. And that could be something really cool to talk about with you as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Well, we are at time. Anything you guys want to close out with?
I don't think so.
If you have anything you want to see,
Yeah.
just drop a comment and then we'll make that a topic for future episodes.
Cool. As well as both of these guys' Instagrams are linked in the description of this video and all of the episodes. So feel free to connect with each of them directly for additional questions that you might have, or obviously if you want to work with them on your own fitness or mentorship in your coaching career. They are both excellent resources for that. So check them out, and we will be back next week.
Let's go.
Thanks, guys.
Peace out.
Thanks.